You're listening to Lowell Association for the Blind's Lab Radio. Lab Radio is a member of the Massachusetts Audio Information Network, your main source of accessible community news and information. Located in Lowell, Massachusetts, we read local news, editorials, feature stories, and more. Lab Radio is brought to you by volunteers and staff of the Lowell Association for the Blind. This is Andrew Haverty, and I'm here with Phillip Wilcox. Phillip has devoted his professional life to analyzing the economic, political, and security dynamics between the U.S. and China. He received his master's in international relations from the University of Southern California and his bachelor's in government and English from Georgetown University. He was inspired to write "The Future is Autonomous." The U.S. and China raced to develop the driverless car after an accident in 2012 left him legally blind. After the accident, he became passionate about autonomous vehicles and their potential. He now advocates for autonomous technology to make transportation better and safer for everyone. Welcome, Phillip.
So thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you very much to the Lowell Association for the Blind and to all of the listeners out there. I really appreciate your attention, and hopefully it's an interesting talk. And also thank you to the Georgetown professor for the Speakers Bureau, Eric Coster, for this opportunity to get me out there and try and get speaking engagements like this.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. So first, I just wanted you to tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in automated transportation.
Thank you very much. And you sort of already touched on it a little bit for that wonderful introduction. Is I spent most of especially my graduate studies, studying sort of a Chinese domestic and foreign policy, as well as U.S.-China relations and the broader East Asian political regimes, and so the economics, policies, and security challenges that are in that region. And after my accident, which left me legally blind, I was shocked, and I felt like trapped because my career and my career path was in sort of the academia research realm, and that was seemed to be impossible for me to pursue. Like, I'm sure maybe some of you have this sort of feeling during the pandemic. You wake up and you don't feel great. You're just like nothing's going on. Feel trapped. You can't do all the things you want to do. So it's very similar. I think most of you might feel this the same way. But then I started to use Envision. They were very great in giving me or to teaching me about a vision assisted technology program called Kurzweil, and that would allow me to both research and write my MA thesis. I returned to my graduate program just 2 years after my accident, and I was able to research and write my MA thesis to receive my MA. So that was a huge accomplishment for me. It was great. But then again, I still, because of my accident and my vision impairment, I cannot get a driver's license and I cannot drive a car. So I then started, especially over the last few years, to follow the development of the autonomous vehicle, or AV, pretty closely. And I was able to, the same professor I mentioned earlier, Eric Coster, was sort of in charge of the writing program that was sort of getting me into the door in terms of writing a book. And that was when I focused, a lot more of my attention last year, obviously, to write this book. And it was something that I really think I feel passionate about, that these vehicles offer a great way to freedom of transportation to people in the blind, disabled, and elderly communities.
Yeah, I've read your book. You clearly have done a lot of research on this topic. It seems like you are very passionate about it. While reading the book, you talk about how this is basically a technology race between U.S. and China. Can you explain why it's important for the U.S. to win this race, and maybe explain what the advantages U.S. has over China and vice versa?
So yeah, thank you very much for the question. It's a great question. So I think that it's both a sort of a race and more of the competition as well. You have both in both countries, you have competition between different companies within the same country, and then to sort of gain the advantage domestically, because everything starts domestically before you even think about exporting it to other places. But then you also have, on Chinese side, they're a little bit new to the field, in the sense that the U.S. has been working on this for an advantage for the U.S. If you could argue since the original DARPA challenges, which were from 2004 to 2007, whereas China, their first sort of AV startup wasn't until about 2016. So you have the U.S. having what, like a 12-year head start in this race
Yeah.
with competition. So that's one advantage. And you also have, from the U.S. side, you have the much larger sort of capital market, and all the venture capital funds are funneling a lot more money to the industry here in the U.S. than is the case in China. And there's sort of we have also have like the long history, both in terms of the technology field of having the vast overall supremacy in the high tech market globally, with places like Silicon Valley and other tech capitals in the U.S. And so we've enjoyed that advantage for a few decades, since World War II, pretty much. So that's something that is definitely within our advantage. But then you have, on the Chinese side, you have an incredible sort of a public-private partnership is much closer than it is here in the US. These are not state-owned enterprises, the people developing and testing these vehicles in China. These are tech companies. And a lot of the main financiers of this industry are tech companies as well. Places like Alibaba and Tencent, and those type of companies, and Alibaba and Huawei as well, which we get to later on, or they're come into play for the trade war dilemma. But I mean, these are tech companies. These are are building, developing, producing these vehicles, and tech companies are financing it. So it's a little bit different from what you would typically think of as a Chinese mindset. We have state enterprises. The government is giving people money. Like, the government is essentially declaring the winner before the race is even started. So that is not the case here for the most part. So that's something that is an advantage with China, is a closer public-private partnership. Whereas in the US, these policies take longer, because vehicles are some of the most highly regulated things in the US. Something maybe rightfully so, given they could be potentially very dangerous or fatal. But these are both at the state and national level, which need to be addressed in order for this new technology to take hold. And it's something that, China doesn't really have to deal with in that sense. You also have maybe special interests, which are a huge part in the US and less so in China. And so the media, which is highly controlled within China. And here, an accident can have a huge negative implications for the industry.
Yeah. Reading your book, it was very easy to read for someone like me who didn't really know anything about this growing technology. So that's what I really loved about it. I guess getting away from the international and political aspect of it, I just wanted to ask you why the average person should care about automated technology and self-driving cars, and basically what is in it for like the average consumer like me.
Yeah, so that's a great question as well. So I think that for the average consumer, I could say that in the US alone, just according to statistics from 2019 through National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, that there be over 36,000 people were killed in traffic accidents
Wow.
just in the US alone. And that's 1.3 million worldwide.
Wow.
Every single year. That's like approaching COVID level statistics for fatalities. This is happening every single year. So like, I don't know if you or anyone else has had someone that's been injured or unfortunately killed in an accident, but it's something that is a tragic event that is happening to way too many people. And they say that over 94% of these accidents are caused by human error. For example, being drowsy, being distracted, drunk, that could be a cause for human error. This statistic is obviously subjective, but it's something that you could easily think about. Say, like, if something happens and it's a less than a second distraction, and that could be what would cause an accident. Where just that the really split second uh, decision or an action could cause an accident. And it's something that is tragic and should be everyone should it's a public health crisis, which is not really portrayed as such by a lot of sort of the media. It's sort of treated as like an isolated incident each time, and so that's certainly one thing that is of concern, and also for things like for climate change, which new President Biden has said this is the #1 issue facing humanity. And he has already rejoined the Paris Climate Accords and has the new executive order mandating that all of the government vehicles be electric. And a lot of these, it'll be within the interest of these companies, the AV companies, to make their vehicles electric too. Right now, they're hybrid. But for example, if they're running as a fleet of autonomous taxis, that if they were electric, then they would cost less to produce, and they would last longer because there's less moving parts and things like that. Obviously Tesla would be electric, given all the other cars are, but it's something that would be within their interest to do so. And with a fleet of taxis, there'd be fewer cars on the road too. So that'd be less congestion, traffic congestion, and also reduced emissions from vehicles. So that's just a few examples.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of benefits. One thing I wanted to touch on is that it's clear that there would be a lot of jobs created with this automated technology. But you do also mention that there would be, a negative effect with jobs being lost, such as truck drivers, Uber, Lyft drivers, just other jobs that require people to operate vehicles. But you also mentioned that it's really up to the US to really respond to this once this technology gets into the mainstream. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think that it would be certainly within the U.S. interest and for the industry success long term for the U.S. to tackle this issue early on or before the issues would become apparent. I think that for the truck drivers, there was an episode on 60 Minutes about the autonomous trucks and the truck drivers. I think that episode was a little bit misleading. It didn't mention that there was a driver shortage for truck drivers in the U.S. And it's been going down and there's a negative sort of negative rate of loss of jobs within the trucking industry, particularly in some states. It's over the 100%, where there'd be more people leaving than joining the industry. And it's in a way it sort of makes sense, because if you're driving cross country, transporting, let's say, tomatoes or grapes from California to the East Coast, somewhere here in Lowell, Massachusetts, or Washington, D.C., then you'd be away from your family for 5 days for each trip. So that's a total of maybe 2 weeks that you're away from your families. Whereas for the autonomous truck, it could be 2 or 3 days uh, to cross the whole country. Because we have laws related to how long can a driver stay on the road at a time for safety as well. And so I think that there's a huge, like millions and millions of trucks on the road, and the autonomous trucks would be a small, very small percentage of that number, especially within the next year to 5 years, and even 10 years down the line. And they say like if there's sort of a little bit of a gradual phasing out within a span of 20 years, which was most likely to be the case, you wouldn't see a significant sort of input of the autonomous trucks until maybe 20 years down the line. There'd be an actual sizable percentage of the trucks out there. So within a 20-year span, it's easier to sort of manage. But I think that we have in the US a lot of like faith going all the way back to the Reagan administration for these job retraining programs and things like that, which have a lot of problems. Like that we have some of the training would sometimes not be anything that the person has done for the work beforehand, so it wouldn't really fit what they want to go into, and there's no incentive for their employer to hire them to give them more money for after their retraining. So things like that would need to be addressed, and to make them more manageable and better policies.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to talk about is the technology aspects of basically how these self-driving cars would function, and how 5G sort of is essential to that. Because right now 5G is just rolling out around the country. We constantly see cell phone commercials pushing 5G, saying that they're expanding their network. So right now, consumers really only know 5G for their cell phones. They know it's faster, but there is a weird concern to me. There's a sort of notion that 5G could be harmful to people. I guess what I wanted to ask is that notion ridiculous? And also, like, how essential is 5G to the efficiency of these automated vehicles?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Yeah, so I don't know if I can really speak to is it harmful to humans?
Yeah.
Well, look at what your phone for your now. Let's say you don't have a 5G phone, but you still have like a 3G LTE, a 4G LTE, something like that. It's the
Yep.
same thing. It's the same thing, but it's just faster and able to do that. So what the 5G does is it allows for like assisting for these AI or the self-driving cars or other automated systems. So it allows them to both process information much faster than otherwise. So on its own, it doesn't have a real purpose, but it assists all these other things to function much more effectively, and with a much more greater broadband. So you could have, let's say, right now, if you have at your house, then you're using your computer, and then you have a few other people using other devices. That'll slow down the network, but the 5G expands that network significantly, so more people can use it without the loss of the latency, like the speed that the information is transmitted. And there's been sort of different opinions about, is it essential to these automated vehicles? In the US, a lot of the companies are just relying on making their vehicle, like the technology and the sensors and everything, as advanced and as good as they can possibly make it, because they know that the government will always be one step behind. They can't rely on the government to build like infrastructure projects and things like that that would help these vehicles. Whereas in China, they have sort of like a systems approach where they have their vehicles and their technology and the sensors, but also you have the government is doing some. There are some SOEs in this, state-owned enterprises, and also some tech companies that are building like roadside infrastructure projects, like street side cameras or sensors that would use their 5G to communicate with the vehicles. And 5G is just one sort of network that, or one sort of communications that a car can use. There are others as well. So there's 5G and there's other things, but um, from the US side, I've heard a lot of the companies saying that there'd be for like teleoperations or telemonitoring. So, for example, you could in your house in Lowell be working at a telemonitoring center for these automated vehicles in California, because it's just to see what are those vehicles doing, and then the 5G would make it easier for them to be an alert. Whereas, okay, there's a problem, and then you would like get a signal about what the problem was. Then you could either send a signal to the vehicle to manage that problem, like make a go around the yellow line for a police person who's telling them to waving cars along. So you could tell the vehicle to do that, or take control of the vehicle yourself. And the 5G would make that sort of a seamless process and make it so you can much more quickly take care of that situation. And also you have the over-the-air updates from Tesla, where you get the updates, but for the automated vehicles, those updates are going to become more frequent and larger. And so the 5G would allow for that to become downloaded to the vehicle much faster.
That definitely makes sense. Our phones are also constantly updating, so having this sort of technology in a car that constantly needs to be updated, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So overall, COVID is I mean, not COVID. Sorry, 5G is a good thing, right?
No, 5G is definitely a good thing.
All right, good.
So, I mean, if there's any sort of evidence of it, hurting humans or doing whatever to people, I mean, I haven't seen any of that really. But yeah, so for all the listeners out there, don't worry. 5G is here to help you, and it's something that will make all these different technologies, not just automated vehicles, run much more smoothly.
Good, good. Now I do have one final question, because in your book, you mentioned how like U.S. citizens have a tradition of owning their own cars. They commute to work every day on their own. They sort of have this luxury of having this like private individual transportation. And you mentioned how in order for automated vehicles to become this sort of mainstream part of our everyday lives, in order to reduce traffic, even get rid of traffic lights, which will obviously reduce traffic with all these automated cars all around. People would sort of need to get used to sharing rides together. Now, what I want to ask is, in general, how difficult do you think this would be for society to get used to, especially in the U.S.? And right now with COVID-19, do you think that idea has come to an even greater halt because of what's happened?
So thank you for that question. I would say it depends, because there's especially among younger people, there's been a lot of changes in terms of how people are transported, the transportation people have. So first of all, the distance people travel, and that's been going down steadily. And right now it is very low overall. The distance people travel to and from for work and things like that. And it's also especially for the younger people, you have a multimodal transportation where you would maybe get Uber has become, grown out of nowhere to really sort of revolutionize just transportation. So, for example, when I was still taking the metro pre-COVID, I would take an Uber to short distance to the metro, and then take the metro to a certain stop, and maybe in DC, then I would walk after that. And there's also, I could have even taken one of those electric scooters. Yeah, so there's many different ways of transportation that people are getting used to now, especially younger people. And I think as people get older, then you have like for the elderly community, a lot of them can't drive, um, or sometimes they might be unsafe because they say that the chance for a person to react to a situation that's happening in front of the vehicle, uh, it takes them longer than a younger person to react to the situation. So it could be dangerous for people to be driving like that. And so this could be a huge benefit if the you could say autonomous vehicle could pick them up at the nursing home to take them to wherever they want to go. So that's something that would be very beneficial to people. In terms of has this been a huge halt for during the COVID-19 pandemic? That's also somewhat true in the sense that a lot of the companies had a break in their testing of these vehicles because now, especially after that accident in 2018 where Elaine Herzberg was killed by the Uber test vehicle, now these vehicles have two people in the car at all times when they're testing, and that had to be sort of changed during the COVID-19 pandemic for social distancing. So there had to be installed these plastic barriers between the people in front,
Yeah.
and things like that. So that was one thing that had to be delayed during the COVID-19 pandemic. But there's other things as well that have been sort of a boost. We have Neuro, who does last mile delivery of things like groceries and things like that with no driver in the vehicle. And it is designed to be safer for people outside the vehicle as inside because there's no driver. So it goes slowly, and it goes to for groceries. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, early in the pandemic, it was delivering medical supplies to medical professionals at some of the California medical facilities that were open there. So it was delivering a lot of COVID-19 supplies to these doctors and people in the medical profession. And you say, just for example, you have before COVID-19 pandemic, you had at Walmart where you had these floor sweeping robots and the checking robots and the shelving robots that there would be a problem for people if they saw them before the pandemic because that'd be someone taking away someone's job. But then after the pandemic, you see a huge shift in the way people saw these robots, and saying that they were reducing person-to-person transmission. So that would be something that they gained a lot of popularity because of that. I mean, these are operating obviously a very constrained situation inside the store, but it's just the general idea of saying that these robots are not bad. Like they're helping. There could be something beneficial to people. You see for example, in Waymo in Arizona, where they have a driverless taxi service, and Chevy Cruise in the San Francisco Bay Area. Those have been sort of successful because there's no driver, so there's no possibility of any sort of person-to-person transmission of any sort of COVID-19 coronavirus. So that's something that it should be promoted. When you say there's no driver, then there is much less risk of any sort of transmission.
Absolutely. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think all this is really interesting. I think this technology is definitely going to be growing and growing, and it's going to be interesting to see how this expands in the future. I do want to mention once again the book is called "The Future Is Autonomous: The U.S. and China Race to Develop the Driverless Car." I urge everyone to check this out if you're interested in learning more about this topic. And I just want to thank you very much for your time, Philip.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you very much to the Lowell Association for the Blind and to everyone listening. I really hope you found this interesting and informative.
So thank you for listening to Lowell Association for the Blind's Lab Radio. Lab Radio is a member of the Massachusetts Audio Information Network. There are many ways to listen to Lab Radio. To request a free specialized radio receiver or for more information about our radio reading service, call Lab at 978-454-5704. Once again, that's 978-454-5704. You can also listen to Lab Radio by dialing 1-631-359-9069. Once again, that number is 1-631-359-9069. You could also visit our website where you can tune in to Lab Radio at lowellassociationfortheblind.org. This has been Andrew Haverty. Thank you for listening.